BelAhdan, and I know it's been hard for you going on telling your father's story as a daughter and also as a writer, and somebody also feels very strongly about the cause that your father, devoted his life into. Tell us a little bit about background
Well,
about.
the Holy Land Foundation was co-founded by my father and a few other people, actually right around the time of the Intifada in the late 80s. And my father was responding to basically a huge humanitarian need. There was huge demand for medical supplies. There were home demolitions, and there were people killed. And so my father, his mere goal was to provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians who were in dire need. Now, the Holy Land Foundation actually grew to be the largest Muslim charity in the U.S. And so they were giving to then became not only Palestine, but also all over the Middle East and other impoverished countries and populations across the world. And even here in the U.S., where there were natural disasters and there were the Oklahoma City bombing, the Holy Land Foundation were one of the first organizations to rush for aid, to provide food, and they organized a blood drive for those folks. And so it was definitely a very legitimate charity. Now, 3 months after 9/11, the Holy Land Foundation was unfortunately shut down via executive order by the Bush administration. And basically, 4 years later, in 2004, my father and four other men, who were later called the Holy Land Five, were charged with giving material support in the form of humanitarian aid to Palestinian distribution centers that are called zakat committees that the prosecutors were claimed were fronts for designated terrorist groups. And so, unfortunately, and what was most bizarre about this case is that the USAID, which is our own government agency, was actually giving aid to the same exact zakat committees. And so then we ask ourselves, why was my father and why were these men targeted for doing the same exact thing that not only the American government, but most national and international organizations were doing? Now, uh, in 2007, the first trial took place, and it was very absurd. There was, in the first time in American history, the prosecutor brought their star witness to say that these zakat committees are are controlled by Hamas. And who was this man? He was an expert witness that was allowed to testify under a fake name, a pseudonym. And so this was the first time in U.S. history that this was in U.S. law that this was allowed to happen. However, it did, and he was an Israeli intelligence officer who testified under the name of Avi. Which was not his real name. And he basically said that he could smell Hamas, and that is how he knows that these charities were controlled by Hamas. And
First time I know a smell can be held as evidence.
I absolutely agree. And so it was among many instances of absurd kind of attempts by the prosecution to try to convince a jury to convict my father. Now, in 2007, despite thousands or millions of dollars spent on investigating this case and many, many years spent on, wiretapping my father and the other men and just searching for evidence, they failed to convince a Dallas jury to return a single guilty verdict. Now, that was a huge, that was immense good news for us, but unfortunately, the following year, after this first trial, there was a mistrial. The judge declared a mistrial because the jury actually could not come up with, it was a hung jury, so they couldn't agree on a single verdict. And so at the end, by 2008, my father was tried once again, and by the end of that trial, he and the other four men were convicted of all counts, and the jury returned, it was a brand new jury, and they returned all guilty verdicts. And so in 2009, my father was sentenced to 65 years in prison, basically for giving humanitarian aid to Palestinians.
Do you think that this is well, like a political trial, or was it? Why was our legal system so eager to prosecute those men?
Well, this is absolutely a politically motivated case, according to many civil rights attorneys who have really criticized the main law that was used to prosecute my father, which was the material support law, which has come under fire by civil rights attorneys and other kind of legal minds. But absolutely, because at the end of this, and at the end of the day, the Holy Land Foundation case is about a bold humanitarian endeavor that was crushed by the Bush administration. I compare my father to Fred Kuramatsu, who was a Japanese American man who, during World War II, was was forced into the internment camps. And that case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled against him. And it wasn't until 40 years later that the case was reopened, and this man, Fred Kuramatsu, was exonerated, and he got a public apology by the president of during the time. But unfortunately, every legal remedy has been exhausted at this point. So my father's lawyer and I are spending our time post the legal process at this point to just raise awareness and speak about the case and hopefully outrage the consciousness of America. There's a point in time where the Supreme Court said it was very much justified to have slaves in this country. Years later, they said that it was completely okay to segregate black people from white people in this country. Then, after 42, again, it was justified for national security purposes to basically gather an entire population, the Japanese Americans, and put them in what were called internment camps, but were essentially prisons. And now, after 9/11, it is justified to put a Palestinian American man in prison for giving humanitarian aid in the name of national security and trying to connect his very pure intentions of giving food and medicine to violent acts when there was not ever a single piece of evidence to tie him to that. And so it is definitely the political climate, but what has been proven over and over again is that those moments that I mentioned, slavery, segregation, internment of Japanese, those later came to be known as very shameful moments of our history. And I know in due time, this will become a very shameful moment of our history. And the scary part about these laws, and I think what will inspire people to really be outspoken, is that it not only affects Muslim and Arab Americans, but it's really starting to affect every American. People in the Midwest, Minneapolis and different parts of the Midwest were targeted. People named Tracy and Tom and Mick were targeted and were subpoenaed in search of material support for terrorism. And so now this law is not only affecting Palestinian Americans like my father, but is affecting everyday Americans.
You know, the severity of the sentence, 65 years, seems like a very long sentence. Is your father was made an example anybody to dare to lend their hands and offer support, humanitarian support to the Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, 65 years is definitely a very absurd number. It's just absolutely outrageous mainly because in the Israeli military courts, someone with the same kind of offense of providing so-called material support will have served anywhere between 6 months to 4 years. And so in America, for a Palestinian American humanitarian to be sentenced to 65 years for providing basic charity to women and children in need is absolutely absurd. And I think um, it's definitely a huge possibility that this was done to kind of teach other people who were perhaps thinking about uh, continuing this legacy and continuing to send charity to Palestine. It's
I know most Americans will look at these cases as just another Palestinians, another name. That's what we see. We see him through the Justice Department, public relation, Fox News, wherever. Tell us about your father. What kind of a man was he?
My father is a basically, he was the kind of man who marched in downtown Dallas wearing a white shirt and holding the Mexican flag and chanting "Si se puede" among the millions who poured onto the streets, marching regarding the controversial immigration bill that was in Congress a few years ago. My father was the kind of man who spoke to me about, you know, civil rights and human rights, and always told me that every group of immigrants, when they first came to this country, were targeted and were kind of really singled out for one reason or another. And he is the kind of person who did every bit of humanitarian work for without any regret. And in fact, on sentencing day, he stood up in court and he said nothing was as satisfactory to me than signing that check. The only evidence you have used against me is to sign that check. But he says it was the most rewarding part of my life to sign a check that would, basically help Palestinian kids, provide them with scholarships and take and provide medical supplies to the injured and to help rebuild homes that were demolished. That was really the most rewarding part of my life.
When was the last time you saw your father?
Well, my father is being held at a communications management unit, which is a prison that was opened during the Bush administration, and it's called Little Guantanamo because there are actually two of them in the country, one in Illinois and one in Indiana, and the purpose of these prisons is to closely monitor inmates and restrict them from communicating with the outside world. And most of the inmates are actually either Middle Eastern or of Muslim descent. So my father's there right now, and my family goes to see him. The unfortunate thing about that is that we get only a fraction of the phone call time and a fraction of the visitation time that we used to get. And everything has to be scheduled in advance and live monitored from Washington, D.C. And all of the visitations are non-contact, which means they have to happen behind a plexiglass wall.
Did your father know about the changes that happened in the law as far as the material support is? Why this is coming as like a surprise to a huge foundation like this that legit and they've been in a business for so long?
My father did everything he can, he and the president, to stay within the law. I mean, when they opened this charity, there was a lot of rumors through kind of pro-Israeli lobby groups and politicians, and a lot of pressure to try to shut down the charity throughout the 90s. And so this was then leaked to the New York Times and the Dallas Morning News. And so my father, upon hearing these news reports, did everything in his power to approach the FBI, to approach the State Department. He hired a lawyer who thereby went to all sorts of governmental agencies and asked the Treasury Department, and basically asked all of these folks, like, please tell me, we are doing everything we can to stay within the law here. We are doing what what our own government agency is doing. And so give us guidance if we're doing anything wrong. And he was told time and time again, you need to look at the list. Look at the designated terrorist list. and he only sent charity to zakat committees, none of which were on the list. However, the prosecution's argument is that Hamas is on the list, and so these zakat committees were controlled by Hamas. This is what they were claiming, um, and and of course, it didn't matter at all to the prosecution that our own government agency was giving charity to the same exact zakat committees.
I know I find it very hard for a daughter to tell her for her father in prison, very patient. I think it's probably harder on you. You are outside and you can't do anything. I mean, he's in jail. He's in jail. He deals this. That's the reality. But how hard is it on you after taking your father away?
Well, it was extremely painful for me because my father and I are very close. We've always been very close. I mean, I learned about American history, from my father before I learned about it in my classroom, and so, he really opened my eyes to kind of the world that we're living in, and just kind of the political state, and really kind of to love all human beings because we are all brothers and sisters. I mean, this was the kind of person my father is. It's this kind of situation either makes you or breaks you, and so I had to kind of reach a point in my life where I decided I would let go of all the anger and just kind of allow the situation to strengthen me and kind of use every ounce of energy I have to speak about this case. And as I said in that piece that I wrote, that I am confident that as long as I'm around, and that my father will remain in the consciousness of many until the day that he is vindicated.
You are embarking on writing your memoir. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I actually I live in New York City, and I came in 2009 actually to pursue a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the New School, and it was an excellent program, and I wrote several chapters of my memoir through that program. And I'm basically writing a father-daughter memoir about our story that is extraordinarily heartbreaking, but is also about longing and just unbreakable hope.
You're born here, so you're an American, lived in American. How does it affects your being in America or living as an American?
I definitely underwent some kind of identity, couldn't really quite identify with one side or the other, but at the end of the day, I know that I mean, this is really the only home I've ever known, and I feel very connected to it. And, I have faith that the American population are a very sympathetic population, and I know that because anyone who hears this case is absolutely outraged and just is in utter shock. And so I do believe wholeheartedly that if people read my memoir, if people are aware of this story, it will inspire an outcry. My goal by speaking is to free my father. At the end of the day, that is what my goal is. That is, and who has recently joined me is my father's attorney, John Klein, and he himself as well has. That is our goal: is to free this man, Ghassan Alashi, my father.
Well, Noor Alashi, thank you so much for everything. You're a courageous young lady. We wish you all the best, and we wish you see your dad very soon. With Kat Moon, Noor Alashi, the daughter of her father, Ghassan Alashi, he was simply sentenced to 65 years in prison for offering material support. That was the allegation, offering material support to terrorist organizations, which nothing more than just offering humanitarian aid to recognized organizations that was cleared from a terrorist act from the State Department. It's a bizarre case of a man that try to do good and end up in prisons away from his family, and his daughter making sure that people will know the truth, and she's speaking the truth to power, and I think that's the theme of her speaking tour. Ahmed Tharwat from here, Marriott Hotel, downtown Minneapolis, and we'll talk to you later. Assalamu alaikum and God bless you all.
Dear Mr. President, I have been writing a letter to you year after year. I'm 11 years old now. I keep on writing a different letter because as I grow up, I keep on learning more. You are a very good president, and I'm really honest about this. I knew you were going to be the president from the bottom of my heart. And there is just one favor I need from you. But first, I need to introduce myself. I'm one of the proud daughters of the Holy Land Five. My father and 4 other great men were put into jail for nothing. They got really long sentencing too. My father got 65 years. He did not hurt anyone or anything. If anything, he helped people. He first went to jail when I was 3 years old. Then he came back after 10 days. In November 2008, after 2 long trials, they took him and the other men to prison again. Now, the favor I really want from you is that I want you to free the HLF-5. You are the only one who can do this, and I hope you will. Did you know I have the same birthday as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Maybe that's why we think the same. Also, I have a question for you. If Martin Luther King was still alive, would these 5 men have been in jail? I never knew feeding children was a crime, but these great men and their families are suffering. They are innocent. Look in their files and study their case, please. I'm sure that you will find it. Also, all these men should be free. Before you were a president, I knew you were going to be one because I told my dad to vote for you, but sadly he went to jail right after he did. I know you are a great president. I have been waiting for my dad for 3 years. I really miss him. He's so far away, and whenever I get to visit him, it's behind glass. I haven't hugged my dad in years. Come on, Mr. President, we need you. Please, can you solve this case? I hope you think about this, and please, as soon as you can. Thank you. Sincerely, an American girl who wants her dad back.